All right. Hello again and welcome. We are going to the roundtable conference, that discussion that is happening at the Alisa Hotel. It's exploring the boundaries of freedom of speech, the professional, ethical, and legal dimensions. Now, this conversation is very important, especially off the back of various arrests of some people within the country for certain things that they have said, some in private, some in public spaces, and so on and so forth. What's the conversation that we really need to understand regarding this? We have several people on the panel. Of course, it's going to be moderated by our very own Vivian Kai-Loko. And so we have lawyer Ace Ankuma. We also have lawyer George Sapon. We have Professor Kwame Kakari. And it's happening at the Alisa Hotel. Let's go over there now and see. This is in conjunction with the National Media Commission.
These arrests or incidents have triggered discussions around freedom of speech and its boundaries. A lot of questions have run through our mind during those times. For example, are we abusing freedom of speech in our public discourse? Is the police overzealous in its application of the law? Or better still, is it a matter of recklessness on the part of journalists and media practitioners? Or is it that the law in its current form must be reviewed, or some would say expunged? Or are we returning to the days of criminal libel law? I'm sure these questions have run through our minds. Now, today's discussion, which is in collaboration with National Media Commission and City TV, will explore the boundaries of freedom of speech. We're going to look at three dimensions: the ethical dimension, the professional dimension, as well as the legal dimension. And we've gone out of our way to pick three key gentlemen who, in these three dimensions, are well versed in the issues. Our aim is to understand what is happening currently and the way forward. So I'll introduce my three guests in a bit, but this is how the discussion will go. We'll have three forms. The first form will take presentations from these three gentlemen, and then we'll have a discussion proper on the issues with the three gentlemen, with myself as well. And then we'll open the floor for questions and comments. So quickly, we'll start with the presentations from the three gentlemen. We'll start with a professional dimension to this matter, and I'm going to introduce the gentleman who will be doing that part. He's a former executive director of the Media Foundation for West Africa. He has been for several years a professor in journalism and mass communications at the School of Communications Studies at the University of Ghana. He has also been involved in training journalists in several countries in Africa over the years. Now, prior to that, and during all those years, he practiced as a journalist, including serving as a Director General of the Public Ghana Broadcasting Corporation in the early 1980s. Now, he's also been an activist pursuing social justice and human rights causes in Africa, including democratic reforms in Ghana. Now, he serves on the board of a number of African and international rights organizations and on the editorial boards of academic publications. He was educated at the City College of New York and Columbia University in New York. Please help me welcome Professor Kwame Kakari with a round of applause. Now, our second key personality will be looking at the legal dimension to this discussion. Now, he is the immediate last managing partner and currently the senior partner and head of disputes of the law firm of Benchi Enchel, Lecha and Ankoma. He has served on the International Chamber of Commerce's Court of Arbitration and currently serves on the ICSID panel of arbitrators and the board of Lex Mundi. He has taught company law, taxation law, civil procedure, and legal writing and editing skills, and has served several papers and published articles on law and the practice of law. Now, he is a member of the Ethics and Disciplinary Council of the Ghana Journalists Association and the Legal Committee of the Ghana Bar Association. He attended the University of Ghana, the Ghana School of Law, as well as the Queen's University. Please help me welcome Mr. Ace Anan Ankoma. If he can join us here. And then our third gentleman is a lawyer, he's a journalist, and he's a recognized industry leader in media and communications policy in Ghana. He currently serves as Executive Secretary of Ghana's National Media Commission. As Executive Secretary, he initiates and implements policies to ensure free, responsible, pluralistic, and diverse media, and also works to address threats to media freedom and development. Now, before joining the National Media Commission, he served as coordinator of publications at the Media Foundation for West Africa, where he organized programs for the defense of journalists in West Africa. Please help me welcome Mr. George Sapon. So like you can see, the three gentlemen well versed in issues of the professional beat of this discussion we're having, which is freedom of speech, looking at the boundaries, professional, ethical, and the legal boundaries. I invite Professor Kakari to give us his presentation. Prof.
Thank you very much to you and to the City Media Group, and to all of you for raising this important issue in our public life. To begin with, journalism is public communication. That is communication, not simply communication that takes place in the public, but it is communication for the public and to the benefit of the public. And it is communication that essentially has to do with matters of public concern and matters of public interest. Having said that, then, whoever practices journalism should be considered a professional. And the question put to me is, what is professionalism in journalism? Simply put, professionalism is competence in the act of performing one's role as a journalist. And what does this entail? Again, as I started with, the kind of communication that journalism practices is one, providing information for the public, ensuring that the public also have a say in public life and public affairs, and then also very importantly, the media serving as what we generally call a watchdog. A watchdog over what? A watchdog over the institutions, government, and individuals who are appointed or who are set up by the public to perform government and its institutions. In all of these, the journalist has a responsibility, a duty to perform for that public space and for the public. When we talk about these three forms of communication or elements of communication, we are talking about providing news and information by which the public can make decisions about, first of all, can learn about what is going on in public life, what is going on in society, what is going on that is necessary, important, and may affect the lives of citizens. Two, journalism provides the space for people in society to express their opinions, their views about life generally, their views about what is going on, their views about how they are governed. And then thirdly, journalists therefore perform the role of critics and also provide the space, the channels, the opportunities for citizens to vent out their criticism, sometimes their frustrations about what is going on that affects their lives. Now, therefore, if journalists are to perform these roles, there are certain basic elements that as professionals, they are obliged to maintain, to observe. And so when we talk about professionalism, it also entails, it requires that the professional, the person performing that role, performs that role according to a set rules of engagement, a set rules of conduct. So we may say that professionalism of the journalist entails a number of elements. One, the moral, philosophical, and my colleague here will deal with the ethical side of it. But professionalism entails observance of the ethical norms, what to do and what not to do. Professionalism also involves technical competence. For instance, if a journalist uses any language, in order that the audience will understand clearly what the journalist is communicating, the language must be standard language. The grammar must be good. The writing or the speech or the presentation must be standard. In other words, the journalist must also be literate, because journalism is an intellectual activity. And it requires that the journalist constantly works hard to attain a level of literacy. Journalism does not admit of illiteracy. When I say illiteracy, I don't mean, I'm talking more about enlightenment, not simply a question of knowing how to read and write. Right. No. And that's where a part of the problem we are dealing with comes from. There's too much illiteracy in our media space, meaning that there are too many journalists who do not read much. There are too many journalists who do not engage in researching, finding out. There are too many journalists who therefore communicate information that's not reliable. And in that sense, that's not edifying for the public space. So professionalism in journalism, simply put, means competence in how the communication is organized and presented to the public. It means competence in the skills and techniques of the work of the journalist. It means constant attempt by the journalists to be on top of the craft they are performing. Now, when we come down to it, professionalism in journalism, a lot of time has to do with the basic information, news, and current affairs that journalists perform. That's traditionally. But this question of professionalism, which requires that journalists must be truthful, they must distinguish between facts, information, and opinion. Journalists must, in their editorial decision processes, be independent of the owner's political interests, advertisers' interests, and so on and so forth. In other words, it means that the information that the journalist provides to the public must be what is called objective. In other words, there mustn't be any subjective interest or any implications of somebody's interest. In other words, journalism is not to serve particular sectional partisan interests. Professionalism in journalism must eschew two things. It must not be partisan. It must also not be sectarian. What does that mean? It simply means what we have said already, that journalism serves a public interest in the public space and not sectional interests. So if, for instance, a newspaper, a radio station is concerned about how an individual citizen is treated by the law, it is not sectional, and it is not necessarily just to the interest of that victim of injustice. The journalist deals with that question of injustice because there must be justice for the whole society. So when a newspaper reports about a question of injustice, what meted out to an individual citizen, what the journalist is doing is alerting the entire society that there is something wrong with justice in the society. And this is an example of how it is, and we must all do something about it. So, but this kind of journalism has not always been like that when newspapers started so many hundreds of years ago. Even in Ghana here, the professionalism we are talking about, news, the facts devoid of subjective interests, objective, and so on and so forth, was not as it was. The first attempt to do that kind of journalism was in the 1930s by the African Morning Post. But yeah, that was the first attempt when the owner brought Azikiwe here to edit the newspaper. But really, the establishment of that kind of journalism, professional journalism as we want to know it, was first properly introduced by the Daily Graphic in 1950. Before then, all the newspapers were largely partisan newspapers, obviously because they were fighting against colonialism and other things. So this kind of journalism, somebody may ask, so what about all these radio stations that are there for political parties and so on? I'll say that they are not performing professional journalism. They are propaganda tools. We should not mix the two. So, strictly speaking, we may not require those partisan media to behave like the non-partisan media. Unfortunately, the partisan media try to present themselves as professional, but they are not, because professionalism does not admit of propaganda. Professionalism does not admit of using the media for a section of society to gain political power, because that involves subjective interests, interests that are not necessarily to the larger public interests. So, to conclude, I'll say that the journalism, the professional journalism, also involves the watchdog role of the media. So it may be asked, if you are saying that professional journalism should not be biased, should not be partisan, should not be sectarian, should not pander to particular interests, how can journalism be professional and still be a tool for advocacy? If a media house, a radio station, a newspaper, a TV station conducts a campaign for certain things to be done for, let's say, a group of people, a community, or some citizens, how can it be professional? It can still be professional saying that journalism ought to be professional does not mean that, or saying that journalism ought to be non-partisan and non-sectarian and non-biased does not mean that journalism doesn't take sides. Journalism takes sides when the matter is of public interest, when it is about social justice, when it is about peace, when it is about the welfare of the entire community. So if a media house engages in a campaign for consumers, for instance, it is serving the public because it wants consumers to have a good deal from the people whose goods and services they consume. If a media house goes on to campaign against corruption, it's because corruption does not inure to the benefit, the welfare of the public interest. In other words, there can be watchdog journalism. What is required is that watchdog journalism must be clearly in the public interest, must clearly target a particular issue that is inimical to society for everybody to see. And it requires that watchdog journalism is not a campaign for the aggrandizement of the individual journalist or the news organization. It must be clear that watchdog journalism is to cure a certain ill in the public state, in the public space, and for the welfare of society. So professional journalism can be conducted and ought to be conducted and still be powerful enough to make people in authority accountable. However, if the object of that watchdog activity, for instance, is simply to destroy an institution, an entity, a government, because one does not like that party in government, that defeats the whole question of watchdog journalism and defeats the whole question of professionalism. In other words, professional journalism always must start from the public interest and end with the public interest. In other words, the rationale, or if we want to test whether a media house journalism is professional, the test is whether or not what that journalism is doing is in the public interest or not. That is the defining line, that this is professional. It has nothing to do with me and my personal interests or the newspapers or the radio station's basic interests. I think that many of our media try very hard in this country to behave like that. But because so many are partisan, so many are doing the work they are doing in media to serve particular sectarian interests, it mixes up the entire space and makes the public communication look not so clean. And I think it will require what is called media literacy, educating the public about these issues we are concerned with, so that when I tune in to radio station A, I will easily determine that this is some political party propaganda. And when I listen to, I watch TV station B, I will be able to discern that, no, this TV station, what they are doing about this issue or that issue is in the public interest. So for the ordinary citizen who consume media products, it's important that we conduct some kind of literacy for them. How do we cure the problems of unprofessionalism? Because this is one of the things that have brought us here. How do we promote greater professionalism in the media? As I said, if media organizations are to be honest with themselves and with the public, they must define the character of their media organization, that I am for party A or party B. I am for religious organization A or religious organization B. Then we know they are sectarian, they are partisan, and we will not demand those kinds of professional standards from them, because what they are doing is propaganda, whether it's religious or political. It's propaganda to win souls for a particular cause. But if we want to promote professionalism, I think first and foremost, it is the owners, the businesses, the people who invest in media organizations that we must first demand that they provide in their media houses, in their newsrooms, what do you call it? Rules of conduct, rules of engagement. I'm employing you to do news or to do programs or this for my station. These are the rules, A, B, C, D, so that you will perform as a professional. The second group we must also be concerned with is the association of the owners. Giba, for instance, Prempag, for instance, for them to also define the professional code of conduct for the industry. The journalist comes down below these levels, because the journalist is an employee. It is up to the owners to determine for the journalist in the radio station or on the newspaper what to do to enhance the objectives of that media organization.
Okay.
So the owner has the onus of insisting, even before the National Media Commission, it is the owner that must insist that I pay you to do A, B, C, D, and so on. But that also brings us to other issues concerning how can journalists maintain professionalism if they are not paid well. Yeah. If they are not paid well, then they are really, they are sort of put in a situation that could easily make them compromise on the professional standards they are expected to maintain and promote. Right. I'll stop here for the meantime.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor Kakare. Great insights and great thought-provoking statements you've made there. We'll interrogate them later. But let's bring in Mr. Azankoma to give us the legal dimension to the discussion as well.
Well, thank you. I guess this will be the boring part. I should stand in front. Thank you. I guess this will be the most boring part of the presentation. And it's intimidating to speak after Prof. because he knows what he's talking about. And coming right after me is George. Well, we're just going to explore the bounds of free speech from the legal dimension. And let me just say this right off the bat. Yes, the repeal of criminal libel was great in 2001. It marked a good Uhuru moment for the freedom of expression. But I'm here to tell you that there are 40 other ways in which your expression can send you to court. And if you don't know them, you might think you're expressing you're expressing your right to free speech, free expression, free press, and could end up in a lot of trouble. I'll go through the definitions quickly. You know what freedom of speech is. It's your right to speak without censorship or restriction. It's linked to the freedom of the press to print or publish without license. Expression generally refers to all of them: speech, press, religion, assembly. That's the right to speak. Does Ghana have constitutional protections of these? Yes, since 1969, every Ghanaian constitution has provided protections of speech, expression, and the press. And 1969 was really a reaction to 1960. Now, you might know that the 1960 Constitution provided for some of these freedoms, but only provided them in the presidential oath. And so in the famous or infamous case of Ria Akoto, the Supreme Court said, well, since it's just an oath, it is a personal declaration by the president, it's not part of the law, it represents a goal, it does not represent a legal requirement. If he doesn't comply with the rights and freedoms in his oath, let the people vote him out. And so when you got to the 1969 Constitution, we were showing that we really wanted these rights. And people must always go back and read the preamble to the 1969 Constitution. It is very interesting. They said, we the chiefs and people of Ghana, having experienced a regime of tyranny, remembering with gratitude the heroic struggle against oppression, having solemnly resolved never again to allow ourselves to be subjected to a like regime, determined to secure for all of us a constitution which shall establish the sovereignty of the people and the rule of law as the foundation of society, and guarantee, and the first thing they said the constitution would guarantee is freedom of thought, expression, and religion. And so our constitution provides, and this is the third constitution after that, that all persons shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression, which shall include the freedom of the press and other media, freedom of thought, conscience, belief, which shall include academic freedom. So that is guaranteed. It's in the Constitution. But there are limitations. The same Constitution that gives says that, however, there can be a law that contains a provision reasonably required for the purpose of safeguarding the people of Ghana against the teaching or propagation of a doctrine which exhibits or encourages disrespect for the nationhood of Ghana, the national symbols and emblems, or incites hatred against other members of community, etc., etc. There are limits to the rights of to free speech. The Constitution itself provides for it. The entire chapter 12 is dedicated to freedom of the press. Yet it says that that freedom is subject to laws reasonably required in the interest of national security, public order, public morality, and for the purpose of protecting the reputations, rights, and freedoms of other persons. Right in our Constitution, we are given the rights with the right hand, and the left hand says, but there are limitations. No rights are absolute. They are subject to limitations. And I'm here to announce and to remind all of us that free speech, free expression, and free press may yet have civil and criminal consequences. We can never forget that. Lest we forget, we used to have the criminal libel regime, which could send you to jail for libeling someone, whether negligent or intentional or seditious libel. Lest we forget, we didn't just repeal that, we repealed 4 dangerous cousins of criminal libel. And we'll look at those dangerous cousins. 1, defaming or insulting the president. Now, I said this and got into trouble in Ghana, that insulting the president is not a crime. It used to be between 1969 and 2001. We removed it by law. So literally, he's insultable. Without going to jail. It's a moral wrong, but I'll show you how you could still end up in trouble for insulting the president, and then publishing a false report that injures Ghana or Ghana's government's reputation. That was also repealed. It was a crime. 2 other dangerous cases was that the president could prohibit your organization by executive instrument, and could prohibit publishing or importing newspapers who, if he thinks that the contents are contrary to public interest, etc., etc. These awesome powers were repealed. I call them the 4 dangerous cousins of criminal libel. All of these were repealed. But there's a curious thing, Prof. They're insulting the president. Guess when we passed it? The NLC in 1969, just before they handed over power to the PP government, in 1969, they felt the need to protect not the prime minister, but the president. Ghana's history is very interesting. If you don't read Ghana's history, you won't understand. Look, you won't understand anything that's going on today. But I just wanted to point that out. And indeed, the prohibiting of organizations was also in 1969, just before they handed over to the Progress Party government. Who were they trying to prohibit? We all know. Now, look at this. Criminal libel was dangerous. And I like this case, I versus Frimpong, because it involved the father of our friend Kweku Bakum, who is Mr. Interceptor, and whose father intercepted a letter that had been written to insulting him. The letter was posted to London. Somebody picked it, gave it to Mr. Kweku Bakum. The person was tried and convicted of criminal libel. He wrote the insult and posted it to London. It came back to Ghana, intercepted by the father of interceptor, and the person went to jail. I've given you, look, one thing. I've put these presentations in PDF. I've authorized CTFM to give it to anybody who wants it. Please, if you're a media organization and you get it, show it to your lawyers. If you're a media organization and you don't have a lawyer, you're already in trouble. But show it to your lawyers and ask whether this is true. There's no time to go through these cases, but you'll find out that you could be in a lot of trouble for what you said. And one thing about publication is that under normal libel laws, publication must be to a third party. Under criminal libel, publication to the party himself was enough publication. We are moving along, we can't wait for this. But interesting people who went in, the pioneer accused the border guards of bribery. He was convicted. Kofi Bedu, spokesman, said a judge was unfit for office. He was lucky because the judge who conducted the trial made a technical error. And so he got out. Lest we forget. And we cannot forget that Tommy Thompson trilogy of cases, where the Court of Appeal held that criminal libel could be committed against a private person, which was indeed the law. And the two Supreme Court decisions that making false statements likely to injure Ghana was an acceptable exception to freedom of speech. And criminal libel was an acceptable exception to freedom of speech. The Supreme Court decided that, majority decision. But it was in the face of this that the law got changed. Lest we forget, not all attention or speech has been decriminalized, ladies and gentlemen. And that what you express in speech, writing, conduct, even singing, I'll show to you, could be criminal. I'm not here to scare you. I'm just here to tell you what is there. Then you can get information. Just say, I'm giving you information. You can decide that you ignore it, but at least you know. Then you can count the cost and the consequences. Threats. First thing to look at. Threats include threatening somebody with libel. That if you say, I'm going to write this story about you, it's a threat. Offer to abstain from carrying out that if you don't, unless you do this, I'll publish, or I won't publish if you do this. It's a threat. It doesn't matter whether the threat will be carried by you or by another person against him or another person. And the method of conveying the threat includes words, writing, direct, indirect, or in any other manner. Now, threat runs through a lot of offenses. If you threaten with intent to put another in fear of unlawful harm, it is your right to speak. But if it's a threat because the person is being threatened with unlawful harm, it's a crime. Now, even in rioting is where 5 or more people gather to execute a common purpose with unlawful violence. Violence is defined to include a threat or offer of force, harm, or mischief. So your threat could amount to violence. And so your speech or your expression could send you to jail for rioting. Robbery is using a threat of assault or harm to overcome resistance in stealing. Extortion is where you use any other form of threat to take property from another person. That's extortion. And so it is your speaking. But if the speaking or your expression amounts to a threat, you could be guilty of any of these offenses. Quickly, nuisance, noise, and breach of the peace. And nuisance in a public place or an open space is a crime. And nuisance is defined as wrongfully interfering with another person's enjoyment of his or her land. And so if you are having loud meetings in your house and they are disturbing your neighbor, that party you have every Friday night is nuisance. It's a jailable offense. It's a punishable offense. And so your expression, your right to have a party, or your right to get up on your roof and shout prayers at 4 a.m. every dawn could get you into trouble. Your right to have a megaphone to preach around people's houses at 4 a.m. could get you into trouble because it's a nuisance in a public place. Free speech. Making loud or unseeming noise in a manner that will cause annoyance or disturbance in a town. There's silence in the room. People are beginning to see their sins and their crimes. Right? And especially when you've been warned to desist and you don't. If you're an occupier of a house and you allow people to assemble to beat, play, or dance to musical instruments, so if you allow your church, the brass band into your house, people are saying, Charlie. Today, I'm just here. I said 40, right? You are going through the 40 quickly. Let's continue. If you persist in beating or playing a musical instrument or making any noise within a 300 radius of any court. So before you make a noise, check whether there's a court within 300 yards radius. Beating a drum with intent to challenge or provoke any other person or to insult a person. You know you can use a talking drum to insult somebody. Yes, that's a crime. So you're right to play drums. The drums cannot say, Goku Mensa. Okay, we've done that. Beating or playing a musical instrument in a town between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. without license.
Hey.
So that church next door, they can't have all night. Then I says, ow. Your next door neighbor can get you arrested for your all night. Unless you produce a license from the district assembly to make noise. Publicly nuisance and public abuse. If you use threatening, abusive, insulting words or behavior with intent to provoke the breach of the peace. So insulting the president directly may be an offense. But if you do it in public to provoke a breach of the peace, the insults can send it to court. So we repealed that. But there are cousins. We repealed that and the 4 dangerous cousins. I'm putting to you that there are 40 other cousins that can bite you, relatives, hanging around waiting for you. Just that it's hardly ever employed. If you publish or reproduce, and this is the one that is causing trouble for everybody. If you publish or reproduce, 1, a statement, rumor, or report. 2, that is likely to cause either fear or alarm to the public or disturb public peace. And 3, know or have reason to believe that it is false. That's what people are calling fear and alarm. What are you saying? Now, how do we define false? The law says that it is false. It doesn't say it is true. It is not false only if you prove that before you propagated it, you took steps to validate or to verify it. That's why I also informally said that for all the prophets, if you say that there's going to be catastrophe in Ghana, and it's proved that it is likely to panic or breach public peace, then you have to prove that it is not false. How is it not false? I'm sorry, it came to me in a dream. It's not a very valuable proof. And this applies to all of us, especially those of us in journalism. Right? I'm not here to scare you. I'm only saying what is there. You can decide that I have seen information, but I won't obey it. Then at least, or that I've seen it, I think I can skirt around it. I'm just providing information. It's my time. When is my time? Just tell me, I'll stop.
Okay.
Now, if you fight or quarrel, or abet one, or if you make loud and seeming noise, or you use a violent or abusive term of reproach, so all those insults that insult people's mothers in their nether regions, you could go to jail. Just that well. This is Ghana. If you make a defamatory or insulting writing or object, or you sing a scurrilous or abusive song with intent to irritate another person, or you are involved in a riotous, indecent, or disorderly or insulting act that annoys another, all these are offenses. Interference with court proceedings. If you use threats or in any way hinder, interrupt, or disturb court proceedings. So if you're arrested and sent to court, and whilst you're in court, you are singing songs. That's a second offense. That's a second offense. All right? If you insult or use opprobrious or menacing acts while in the presence of the court. If you publish anything concerning pending court proceedings or a party with intent to excite popular prejudice for or against the party. You know about civil contempt. There's an aspect of civil contempt that is a crime in our criminal law. So if there are pending provisions, the court provision said, this man, he's a thief. You go right, he should lose the case. He said, you've committed a crime. You have your freedom of speech, but there are limitations. Know it so you know how to live. Electoral offenses, how is it relevant? If you attempt to prevent somebody from voting by a threat, it's a crime. If you intimidate another person, now I like this. If you intimidate, it's defined as endeavoring to influence the conduct of a voter in respect of election by a threat of an evil consequence. Please, those are not my words, it's in the law. So if you go to a person and say, if you vote, it's wooing an evil consequence, offense. Or I'll take you to the malam, offense. In other words, if I give you money and make you swear That if you don't vote for me, you will die the next day. Evil consequence, threat, offense, jail, or maybe fine. I'm moving quickly along. Indecency and obscenity. Wow, there's freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Who determines what is indecent? What does morality have to do with the law? Well, let's see. If you publish or sell an obscene book, if you fix something on your wall, which is obscene, an indecent picture, printing or writing, or even if you give it to another person to post it. So I do the obscene writing, then I give it to Samens. That Samens put it on CTFM's wall. I am guilty, Samens is guilty. Or singing a profane, indecent, or obscene song. I haven't talked about any university in Ghana. I haven't spoken about any house of residence. But there you have it. Profane, indecent, or obscene song. Advertisements of venereal diseases. Not just that. Or sexual infirmity, or preparations claiming aphrodisiac powers. It's all indecent. So you see how many of your newspapers should be in jail by now, and your radio stations. Yeah. Something power. Nah. Unless the Ministry of Health has approved of the advert. Willfully and indecently exposing your body in a public place or in a public view with intent to insult any other person. And so you know that it's possible that one of the highest forms of insult, I understand, could be going before the person and exposing yourself. Offense. Then I say, so what about the hand? That is usually exposed. So that can be, this one, right? But I get into all kinds of debates with myself about some of these things. Other conduct, quickly. So I told you, insulting the president per se is not a crime, but insulting a chief is a crime. So you can say what you want about the president. You may get away with it. But if you say that about the little chief, some subs too, crime. Insulting or threatening the national flag or emblem. So I wonder what happens when you bend. You can bend the American flag. Don't try that with Ghana flag. Criminal trespass is defined to include entering my land in an insulting manner, or having been allowed onto my land, behave in an insulting way. You are in criminal trespass. Are your eyes being opened? Okay. Now, there's also the use of threatening, abusing, and insulting language on a peace officer. So you can say you are an idiot, but if you say Papa Koti, you're in trouble. So you can say it to me. You can't say it to the police. So when I said the president could, not that the president could be insulted, that insulting the president is a crime, somebody wrote a banner headline. One of them was, "Can I insult Isankuma?" The another one said, "Isankuma is an educated idiot." And I said, "Oh, you can only say that about me. If I were a policeman, you'd be in jail the next day." But that's the law, and I present it. Do what you want with it, okay? Publishing a journal or newspaper advert, including fortune-telling, palmistry, astrology, or any other subtle craft, device, seeking or calculate or likely to deceive or impose on an individual. There, the editor, publisher, proprietor, and printer are all liable. So palmistry, fortune-telling, astrology. Isn't there a right to freedom of religion? Yeah, but our law says this is an exception. We haven't tested it in the Supreme Court. But even that right to expression has limitations. Listen to this. Publicly offering a reward for stolen items and saying that it's on a no questions asked or no arrest made basis. So if somebody steals my car and I come to CTFM, they put an advert out that if you return the car, no questions asked. Crime. Me and CTFM. Crime. Then if you offer to refund okay, in case you have bought my car, bring it back, I'll refund the money to you. Crime. The ums and ahs in the room are getting worrying. You are interrupting my interruption. Thank you. Other conduct. Being drunk and disorderly in a public place. You can be drunk, but you can't be drunk and disorderly. So your right to get drunk is limited, because when you are drunk, you must go quickly through the stages of drunkenness into comatose. If you stop at jocos or lacrimos, you could be in trouble. All right? I like this. Behaving irreverently, indecently, or insulting being drunk or whatever. Behaving irreverently, indecently, or insultingly near a funeral or public burial ground during the burial of a body. Basically, you can do that nonsense in your house. Don't take it to when we are burying a human body. And actually, behaving irreverently in church or a mosque is also a crime. So if in that church they serve God this way, and you go with dancing, if it's irreverent, you could. Okay, I have to end. Fixing or attempting to fix a placard, paper, or thing on a building without permission. So you can go on your demonstration, but your demonstration saying, I support e-levy, you can't put your placard on my wall without my permission. Offense. You have the right to express, but you can't express on my wall without my consent. Right, I'm going to end quickly. If you write a letter for an illiterate person and you don't state your name, or the letter doesn't convey what the illiterate person wanted to say, it's a crime. But this was more interesting. And forget about the telegram person. If you use another person's name to sign a petition, crime. 40 ways in which you could still go to jail for expression. That's what I'm presenting to you. I'm going to end with this. Taking an unlawful oath. What is an unlawful oath? That I will commit or abet a crime. That I'll conceal a design to commit a crime. That I'll prevent the discovery of a crime. Or I'll conceal the existence of an association of persons that want to commit a crime. So the people who commit a crime, you see them, then they make you swear an oath that you won't tell anybody. It's an unlawful oath. The two of you could go to jail for it. But that's the criminal part. Don't forget that there's still the civil part of defamation. And defamation is where you say something that ridicules a person or lowers him in the estimation of right-thinking members of society. I know that almost every media house has been sued for defamation before. And so you know what it is. I've given you a definition of it. Then we have to deal with contempt. Civil contempt is when you disobey a court order or to do or abstain for something. So if you go to court and the court grants an injunction against you and you defy it, that is civil contempt. But there's also criminal contempt. One is in the face of the court. And I must say this to journalists. You can't interrupt court proceedings or record, film, photograph, or sketch in court without the court's permission. Your freedom of sketching ends at the door of the court, except the court has given permission. You could be in contempt. Second one, contempt outside the court, and that's where they normally catch you. Publishing things that interfere or disrupt the administration of justice, including publications that prejudice a fair trial, prejudge, preempt issues, scandalize, or otherwise lower the court's authority. That is why there are some things I won't talk about today, because I know the thing is pending in court. If you ask me a question about treason, I won't answer you, because what I say may prejudge something that is going on in court. Be careful. If the matter is pending in court, it is a dangerous thing to fall into the hands of the law. Don't set yourself up for it. My concluding thought is actually from the same Republic versus Tommy Thompson decision, a statement by Justice Kpegan, and I'll say this and end. He says, there is a need for a meeting point between individual and societal rights for harmony. For while an unbridled insistence on and enforcement of personal rights have the grave potential of leading to anarchy, so also has a similar insistence on enforcement of societal rights the potential of undermining the democratic values of a society. So we must always perform a balancing act. Your rights and freedoms as against societal values. And you must determine where the weights fall, and with this information, bear the consequences. The script is available. Contact CTFM. I've authorized them to give it to anybody by email or whatever process. Keep it at your elbow. Read it and say, this is nonsense. I'm still going to do it. At least I'd have done my job. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ezankoma. These 40 relatives have got us scared now. Now we're afraid to do certain things, knowing that we may end up in jail. Before I introduce our final speaker, let me acknowledge the presence of some key persons who are gathered here with us today. Mr. Yao Boafo, Wedu Aye Boafo, who is the chairman of the National Media Commission. Shall we acknowledge him? We also have in our midst Mr. Cecil Sonkwa Mills, who is the president of GIBA. And also Mr. Afel Moni, who is the president of GJA. Shall we acknowledge him? We also have with us the editor of Ghanaian Times, Mr. Dave Agbenu. And then we also have the managing editor of Ghana Fact, an independent fact-checking platform, Mr. Rabiu Al-Hassan. Okay, let me introduce our final speaker for this part of the program, Mr. George Sapon, who will look at the ethical dimension to this discussion.
Thank you very, very much. I think perhaps ACE has given us so much meat, so heavy, one would have wished that we were left there.
I know.
But if you missed the message, the summary is that Ali Baba may be gone, but the 40 thieves are around. So you better watch. I've been asked to share some thoughts on the ethical dimensions of the boundaries on free expression. And first, all of us can understand that when we talk about ethics, we are talking about very philosophical issues, in some sense moral, and therefore it's difficult to set the boundaries because it's very complicated. But I offer two methods for reflecting on what the boundaries should be. Number one is something Professor Kakari used to tell me repeatedly, that the whole question of ethics sums up in truth-telling. Honest search for the truth and courageous telling of the truth honestly. If we want to set the boundaries in very technical terms, perhaps I'll go back to one of the slides that Ace shared with us. Article 164 of the Constitution. It sets the legal boundaries. But because ethics is so broad and complicated, it appears to me that the legal limitation provides some framework for reflecting on what are the ethical boundaries. What does the law say? I wish we could have that slide on Article 164. Perhaps I should have drawn your attention earlier. But as Ace pointed out, it subjects the whole of media freedoms to laws that are reasonably required in the interest of national security, public order, public morality, and for the purposes of protecting the rights and reputations of others. If we use this as our framework, what it would mean is that the proper reflection on ethical boundaries should only adapt this to say the ethical boundaries should be those ethical principles that are reasonably required in the interest of national security. So let us look at the elements there. It says the whole of the right to free expression is subject to laws that are reasonably required in the interest of national security, public order, public morality, and for the purpose of protecting the reputations, rights, and freedoms of other persons. So let us replace laws with ethical principles. That then could set a good framework for our reflections. So when it comes to, say, national security or public order, public morality, the rights and freedoms of other persons, how do we deal with this? I just want your permission to read just something small from Ben Bradley's book, A Good Life. For most of us in journalism, we would recall Ben Bradley as the editor of the Washington Post who published the Pentagon Papers. He is the same person who broke the Watergate scandal. So this is a person who has had his own run-ins with the American security establishment, was highly distrustful of them. But in his career, something happened, and I want to read from he himself. This is his book, his autobiography, and this is from page 451. Somebody had gotten some material that was written in Russian and had an inkling that it was of security importance. If he published the material, this is the heat of the Cold War, his newspaper would be up there. But he decides that in the circumstance of that material, even though he could make a lot of money out of it, he would hand it over to the American security establishment. So listen to him. He says, in September 1994, this is years after the incident, a Soviet weapons expert at the Central Intelligence Agency reported for the record that the document he gave them gave the CIA the best insight they had on Soviet strategic force sea-launched ballistic missiles and ICBMs, on their engineering capabilities, on their propellant capabilities. At the same time, Inman described the document as unique material judged to be valuable to America's security interests. So this is a person who never trusted the American security system. He was not when he was handing this over to them, he was not taking a decision under any compulsion. He had decided that, based on his conscience and his own personal reflections, the stability of American society was more important than the money that he will have. So it appears to me that when we deal with matters that have to do with national security, perhaps without submitting to any claims by anybody towards intimidation, towards politics, our own personal reflections on exactly where does this lead would be a very useful reflection point on how we set the boundaries ethics-wise. It appears to me that we could do the same thing for the other elements in there. But because of time, I wouldn't go too much into that. I just want to raise the regulatory analysis that for us from the National Media Commission we saw, and I'm giving you examples that do not speak to the matters in court, but to the trend from a regulatory point of view that ethically we expected a certain response from the media. So start from, in Ghana here, we know that coup d'etats have nicknames. So 1966 was liberation, 72 was redemption, then we had redemption 2, then 79 was an uprising. Oh, you see, yes, the supreme one, yes. Then we had revolution. So if you are talking within the public space, you do not veil your communication by references to coup d'etat with monikers. So somebody stands on TV and says, I'm calling for an uprising, and says he's surprised that the military is quiet. The next moment, somebody mentions coup d'etat by name and sets it in a conditional statement. If A, B, C, D, coup d'etat. So the communication is cascading. In the next example, somebody positively asserts knowledge of somebody involved in the preparation or attempt for a coup d'etat. So from a regulator's point of view, you see the communication about this cascading. That is the point where you begin to feel like perhaps the media industry, if it has its antenna properly on in terms of its ethics, would begin to respond in very direct ways that address this. In the case of the beginning of the communication, you see that the media house that is involved, the presenter who makes the statement gets support from management, and then secondly gets support from the board. So from that point on, you are no longer dealing with the irresponsible behavior of one presenter, but a whole institutional acceptance of that behavior. It is my submission that this should signal to you immediately that from an ethical point of view, and I'm not talking about the law, from the point of view of ethics, somebody is directly falling down their job. The second element, because of time, that I would want to share some thoughts on, if we want to set ethical boundaries for Article 164 that I just spoke about. And I would want to use a simple diagram I have developed that, if you could help us. Okay. So for the media, and I want to step out here a bit. What's the pointer? Okay. Can you see it on the screen? I can't see it. I was looking for the pointer mark. When it gets to the screen, I miss it. But I think we can talk about this. Anytime you are in doubt in dealing with material that can impact others, particularly in relation to privacy and reputation. This I developed for NMC's use. It's become very popular with regulators around the world. Look at the horizontal line as your person mark and the vertical line as place. So you have three boxes there. All that it means is that if the matter relates to a private person in a private place, that is red, that's danger. Be extremely careful. On the other hand, if it's about a public person in a public place, it's green light. In most cases, you could do this without too much wahala if, coming back to the beginning of our story, you are truthful. You've truthfully and honestly searched for information on the matter. You have presented it honestly and truthfully, as Professor Kakari will put it. The gray areas come when you are dealing with a private person in a public place. Many things that happen within a public space could be good game if it's human interest. No. The real danger, again, when it's about a public person in a private place, we want to exercise caution. We want to suggest that in those instances, please be careful of the material unless the issues that are involved there breach the law. If somebody is in a private place, a public person is doing something in a private place, and you intend to cover, be sure that the two concepts that would guide you would be illegality of the action or the bigger question of public interest that Prof raised. If you can't satisfy your mind on these two things, be extremely careful. I just want to end by indicating that when we talk about public place and the private place, it's not about ownership, but it's rather about use. So a hotel must be a private, maybe owned privately. But those areas of the hotel that are for public use could constitute a public place. At the same time, some property could be owned by the state. But if it is understood to be for private use, that would be a private place. So the house of the president, if he lives in public facility, the home of a minister, may be a private place. There are situations where the same facility, certain portions of it may be public, other portions may be private. So if we came back to the hotel analogy, whereas the gardens, the restaurant, the lobby, and if it is in a conference room of a public event, could be public, the bedrooms, the washrooms are certainly private. So you cannot say that you obtained the material in the hotel and you consider the hotel a public place, and therefore if it involved somebody in a room that is supposed to be private, it is accessible to you. So I want to end here and thank City very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, George. Let me say that we are live on City FM and City TV. We're also live on our Facebook handles for City TV and City FM. And we're also live on graphic.com.gh. So if you're watching us on TV now, this is City TV. If you're listening to us, it is City FM. I think we've come to the second part of the program, where we will look further into some of the issues they've raised, some of the incidents we've seen over the period. I think Mr. Nkrumah has given a caveat on some of the cases which are still in court, so we'll try as much as possible to stay away from those cases, but of course we'll find a way to look at some of the issues. I think we'll start with the law, because Aza's presentation has put all of us you know, we're all hungry now. We're all worried. 40 relatives of the law. You think it's just one main one that we're all shouting about, you know, but it turns out there are 40 more that there are problems with. So let's start with the existence of the law, as if you allow us. Do you think that we may have to perhaps look at that law? I mean, I was reading that in Kenya, for example, they had to look at some of their laws in terms of the criminality around it and situate it just with the civil part. But we still have the criminal part around it by what you're saying. Is it time for us to re-look at the law? Some say just review it. Some are saying totally clear it out of the law. What are your thoughts on that?
Remember that a lot of these laws preceded our constitutional democracy. They were not passed with journalists in mind.
Okay.
It's just that there are things that you do now that may make you fall foul of the law. And some of them may be protected because of the constitutional protections. Now, we have had arguments about this causing alarm, fear, and panic. The root of this is in an illustration. We are all in this room. And then I appear and say, snake. And people run out. And people get injured. What offense have I committed if this law didn't exist? That I made a false statement. I didn't have cause to believe it was true. I knew it was false.
Yeah.
And as a result of it, I caused fear and panic. Not that I caused, there's the likelihood of causing fear and panic. But when you take the law, because the law doesn't apply to just one scenario, there are a lot of scenarios that then come up that the law may be reasonably applied to. So I think that the attitude that, no, all of these are inhibiting, they should be removed from the law, it doesn't serve society.
Okay.
I think the first thing to ask yourself is that, can I still exist and perform my profession or my job in the face of these laws and still be successful? And so you see all the various people who have gone through the journalist profession and haven't fallen foul of this law before. Why is it that, as for you, you want the law to change because you want to be a journalist? You understand? And so first of all, you ask yourself about compliance. But if the law itself is being applied in an egregious manner, as I believe criminal libel was, then we can campaign for the law to be removed. Because that was targeted. If you look at criminal libel, almost every public official would have a defense if he libeled me. But I almost don't have one if I libeled him, and I could end up in jail. It was clearly being applied in a manner that was oppressive, so that was removed. So I'm happy to inform the conversation and to start a conversation about these things. But an attitude that, now all of these are repressive, let's repeal them, I don't think is a forward-looking thing. The first thing is that, can I comply? 2, do these affect me in any way? I mean, so you want the law to be removed so you can stand in front of my house in the morning with a megaphone? Really? Now, if they do it to you,
You'll be happy.
would you be happy? I always give the example. Bernard, by the time we used to go for all those dawn broadcasts and things like that. Now, if they do it to you, see how painful it is. You go at dawn and stand in front of somebody's house. Hey, accept the Lord. Repent. Today, somebody is also doing it to me. Mm-hmm. Every Sunday morning, there's nobody in the church. They are preaching before the sermon. All of those people living in those houses, when you die, you won't go to heaven with your house. And I'm sitting there, I'm trying to be angry, and I'm like, keep quiet, you have done it before. Let them do it to you. Right? It cuts both ways. Yeah. And so I think the attitude should be, whoa, these exist. I haven't flouted any of them so far. Or I don't intend to flout them. Or, no, this is too bad. Mm-hmm. Let's fix it. I think that a more qualitative examination of these will help. That is why I say it's available to you. We can't digest all of them in one sitting.
Right.
Go sit down, take a look at it, and let's continue the discussion.
Which ones do you think need fixing?
Well, there are a lot of them which need fixing because they've never been applied. If the law was strictly applied on profane songs, our university campuses would be very interesting. I have a lot of friends, lawyers, who would end up in jail. Stop pointing at people. Yes, right, George. I know, George. There are a lot of people I know who would be in jail. Ask yourself, really? But to think about it, if it's done in front of your house with a way to disturb you all the time, you would not like it. So, like I said, I don't want to pinpoint any of them. Some of them even look funny. We have laws in Ghana which says you must clean your frontage. And frontage is described as the front of your house and all the surrounding space. And it's described as the space in front of your house going past the gutter into the middle of the road. You have a duty to clean from your wall to half the road if somebody's house is across the road. The two of you share the road half and sweep the front of the road. Oh, it includes filling holes in the road.
Oh.
No, don't worry. I don't have anything to do with my time, so I read law. Yes. So there's a sense in which pothole filling in front of your road or not filling the hole is an offense.
And I have to pay for that?
Yeah, for being a citizen.
Wow.
But at the very least, how? At the very least, it talks about weed, sweeping rubbish in front of your house or the space around your house. You must clean it. It's a crime not to clean it or to weed in front of your house. But imagine that it was enforced. Just imagine for a brief moment. You see all those people who have nice house in residential area. As for this man's house, it always has weeds. If he's summoned once to court, he will clear the weed, and your area will look better. And so there's always the pros and cons. Let's weight them. Let's not immediately say, let's get rid of this because it's inhibited. Let's see, what was the purpose? What was the social aim? What mischief was it meant to address? Is it addressing it? Do we tweak it or do we remove it? I think that's the more positive attitude. But we must begin the discussion on these things. That Ali Baba and his 4 cousins went, but there are 40 thieves waiting.
Okay.
At least 40.
Right. So over the period till the last quarter of last year and this year, we're not really seeing the arrests. We're not really seeing the court bit and all that. Is it that the new police dispensation is changing the way of doing things, or people are now being more reckless?
Look, it's been there. Soon after the Kufuor government repealed criminal libel, a guy was arrested, and including insulting the president. A guy was arrested for insulting the president. In those days, I was younger and more foolish, and so I went on air to say the person hasn't committed any offense. The insult wasn't from there. It was the police who responded. Tell that Isama guy that we also know the law. Of course, quietly, the guy was released. Then someone did it in the next government, and I said it, and then the insults continued. It happens, but it's normally 1 or 2, and it's hushed up. Is there a coincidence between a more active police force and more people being picked up for these things? Probably. You see, because it says that when do the people cast off restraint? The absence of leadership. And so a more active police force, I believe, is reading the law some more. And is going to say, no, you can't get away with saying this. No, what you said might look or sound innocuous. But is it inciting people to do something that the law says should not be done? Then a more active police force is saying, no, we won't allow this to happen. Let's process you and let the court decide whether you are guilty or not. And so there's probably a coincidence between the two, right? But like I said, let's be informed. It is possible that the person does not know, but unfortunately for you and I, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Mistake of fact is an excuse. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse. The most typical of this case, the guy was called Nyameneba, and he was caught smoking weed. And he said he mistook it to be a herb that was going to cure him. The court said he's right. Yes, it was a mistake of fact, not ignorance of the law. There's a case called Nyameneba in the Republic. So state versus Nyameneba. His name is very interesting, Nyameneba, yes. So yeah, back to the point. I believe there's a coincidence between the two, but it should make us more careful. Like I said, it must inform a discussion. Do we need these laws? What were they passed to achieve? Are they achieving them? Or have they become old, calcified, and they are being used to hit us on the head when they don't make sense anymore? Then we can initiate the discussion.
Okay. Prof, I'll put that question to you.
The same question.
Yes.
Repeat it.
Of him saying, are these laws serving the purposes that they were intended to do? Is it being used deliberately against us or not?
I agree with him, broadly in his analysis. Coming to the police, the question, why does it seem that there is a spate of the enforcement of the law? Again, we live in this country, and don't most of us complain that we have so many laws, we have so many rules, but nobody enforces them? We've been complaining. So, but let me also say that from where I'm observing the media, there has been too much recklessness, too much abuse of press freedom, too much unprofessionalism, and a lot of ordinary citizens, not even public officials or presidents, are insulted, abused, and then the journalist goes scot-free. There's been quite a lot of, I think, abuse of the freedom on the airwaves particularly, and also in print and on social media and so on. So to some extent, if somebody is using the law that exists to say, hey, watch it, I think we must find out whether or not, one, what the enforcers are trying to cure is legitimate. If there are problems they are trying to cure. The question is simply that, as I keep saying, when the police engage in policing speech, we have a problem. But again, we don't have an effective regulatory system, neither in the newsrooms, nor at the industry level, nor at the national level. So we've been telling these organizations, GJA, GIBA, PRIMPAC, that listen, if you don't deal with your people, a day will come when things, between 1992 and about 1996, and I think George may recall, when something was done to a journalist, you would even find market women rising up to defend the journalists. Not long after that, when a journalist is picked up, some people even call on the radio, Momono, that kind of thing. So it is the media themselves, or the bad nuts in the media, who are creating the problems for the entire industry. Indeed, some people are even beginning to say we should bring back criminal libel law. Yeah. They don't know what it is. They think that is all what gave all these freedoms. So I think that what should happen is to strengthen the self-regulatory processes and mechanisms, not even the national media, but as I keep saying, the onus of the media. The onus is on them to clean up their staples. Otherwise, may I use the opportunity to ask Ace a question? Ace, I didn't hear you talk about the Official Secrets Act as a limitation, particularly to journalistic practice.
Yes, it did come up with State Secrets Act, and I pointed out to the certain provisions of it about where you can have access and what information you are allowed to have access to. Frankly, it took me about 3 days to prepare these,
Yes,
and I was literally
of course.
tired. And Bernard, I could take a whole hour. So I've limited this to just the criminal offences act. Okay. But yes, there's the act which limits where you have access to, what you can record or film or touch, and what information you can give out from certain areas. I have no record of anybody actually being tried and convicted under that act. It's often that the matters are resolved very quietly. But we could have a session where we could delve into that as well. Okay. But at the time, I did put a little piece out about the bounds where state secrets are concerned. And the question is whether the matter going on is actually a secret or not. That is actually defined. It has to do with geographical drawings, etc., etc. It's quite a detailed act, but quite old.
Yeah, okay. Yes.
Quite old. And some of these provisions have no application now. It's like the TV license law. Yeah. It's regulating a specific item, which was called a TV then, with valves. What we have today doesn't have it. So is it the same? Or are we going to do a common sense, reasonable extrapolation and interpretation of it to apply to it? So it's a pretty old law, modeled after the English law, I think somewhere in 1962. Yeah. And I think a fair bit of it has been overtaken by technology. And so a strict application of that law itself might be difficult in a time like this. But it's a discussion that we need to have. You know, do we need that law? Do we amend it? Because the country we copied it from has moved forward with more, and actually become more liberal, while we are still stuck in the 1960 rendition of their law that we copied here. So we need to look at that. Yes, that act exists and could cause some trouble.
Actually, the only time I know when that law was used, and you lawyers may correct me if I'm wrong, and Mr. Ayeboafu may also recall that the only time it was used was during the PNDC time when Dompre of the Ghana News Agency was charged under that law and imprisoned for 20 years for reporting something on cocoa.
Tribunal, right? It's not in the law reports.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I have to check. It must have been the tribunal, but they used that law to. And it was after 8 years of campaigning by the Ghana Journalists Association that he was released. But let me also add something to what George said. George, I will summarize what George said in words that I think is that the whole question of ethics concerning the privacy aspect, particularly, may be summed up in this philosophical, biblical thing. Do unto others what you would want others to do unto you.
Yeah. That's it.
Done there.
Yes, George.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on the brilliant submissions that both Ian and Prof made about your concern that is this law being used more honorably now. I think three things need to be looked at in that sense. One is the lack of overall regulations of the media sector. So people are frustrated. There are things that you really need to have your hands on, but there is nothing to fall on. In those moments and across the world, that happens. I recall that after 9/11 in the US, very extant laws were looked at to see if they could use to deal with terrorism. Over time, they passed a number of new legislation. Anytime society comes under stress, expect those things to happen. Okay. Number two is lack of party discipline within the political sphere. It is not clear how a young person who enters a political party in Ghana now should grow. There are no paths to growth. So the only substitute is to exploit your nuisance value. The more noise you make, the more attention you get. So if you can insult the opposing political party, then you get attention. In fact, if you are lucky to get into trouble for it, then you have suffered for the party.
Yeah.
And therefore the reward system must apply. So that encourages more and more. My last, and I say this with caution, but I have to say it. My senior and everybody should recall that most of these laws in relation to the media, we were not too sure about the constitutionality of some of these. So the police itself was careful until the Supreme Court spoke in the matter of the Ghana Independent Broadcasters and NMC, where the court itself gave indications that these laws exist and could be applied to media situations. Okay. It seems to me that the convergence of these three elements is what is leading to what we are seeing. Because these laws were not made as a media regulatory instrument, their application to the media would always be problematic. That is one. The second is that in the case of 207, I've said it repeatedly, if we don't address the bigger problem and even the police or the public space begin to think that it offers us a leeway, my fear is that it doesn't, because falsity is such a critical ingredient in that law. If our concern is about the alarm and panic that it causes, what are we going to do when we have communication that indeed causes fear and alarm, but it's not false? Then we are stuck. You understand? Yeah. Again, the police should notice that precisely because of the nature of the politics that we have, the more you arrest these characters, the more popular you make them within the political space. And therefore you create copycat scenarios for other young people in the political parties. Let us be very honest with ourselves that we are going into an election that we have not seen before. In every election, we find a way to show the uniqueness of it. But the one before us, we've never seen before, where political parties are split at the seams in parliament, where everybody's survival depends on how they can organize enough majority in the House. It's going to be a more difficult election ahead of us. You understand? It's going to be a more difficult election. So if we don't get together to address the regulatory challenges that we have, we are going to have a scenario where neither of these laws that we are discussing would be adequate to address the concerns that confront us.
Right. Let me bring in.
Just one thing about
yes,
state secrets.
that's right.
We should always inform ourselves. Yes, the 1962 State Secrets Act. It says if you have in your possession control a secret official code word or password or any sketch, plan, model, article, note, document, or information that relates to it, or is used in a prohibited place, and prohibited places are defined, or anything in such a place, or you have obtained it in contravention of the act. So it means that you got this information not through the act's processes, or even if it's given to you in confidence, and you then breach it, you have breached the State Secrets Act. If you communicate this code, word, password, sketch, plan, model, article, note, document, or information to any other person except a person authorized to receive it, you commit an offense. If you use it to benefit a foreign power, you commit an offense. If you retain it in your control when you have no right to retain it, you commit an offense. So you see how broad it is. So the conversation there can't end. There are so many beyond the 40 thieves.
That's right.
Which can still trap you.
Including the section 76 of the electronic communication.
Yes, I didn't even mention that one.
Yeah.
Yes, that now if you communicate the false information by electronic means, that's another category of offense. So the things are
Too much.
The landmines.
Let's bring in the chairman of the NMC, Mr. Ayabuafo. Now, we've all agreed that there's some bit of recklessness we're seeing on our airwaves and in public discourse. How do we stem this?
Thank you very much. The first thing is that sometimes we need to understand the concepts that we use. one of the things that is creating the difficulty for us is that we have misunderstood what press freedom means. Now, what press freedom means is that nobody should interfere with anybody in their effort to express themselves. But after you have expressed yourself, you must bear responsibility for that expression. It is our unwillingness to accept the liability attached to the expression that is creating the difficulty. You see, when A said that when he comes and say snake, he has the freedom to say snake. But in the course of us attempting to run away, if any one of us falls down, he is responsible for that, and he must take responsibility. I mean, in simplistic form, what one seminar said is that it is like graphic, carrying the newspaper in graphic vehicle. Then when you get to a light, a red distance, when the street light is on and it is red, you have the freedom to move. But if you move and you hit another vehicle, you must bear the cost of repairing that vehicle. And that is exactly the difficulty that we face. That nobody should stop me from making any statement that I want to make. But when I make that statement and it affects affairs, I have a responsibility to restore the integrity that I have baselessly destroyed. Now, you know, the difficulty that we face, in particular for us at the National Media Commission, is that people think that we must defend everybody, irrespective of what they do, for as long as they are media people. But what people forget is that the National Media Commission is not for journalists, it's for every Ghanaian. And so if you're a journalist and you malign an innocent person, it is the duty of the Media Commission to restitute that individual who has been so maligned. And therefore, if you expect that whatever that you do, irrespective of your conduct, the Media Commission will come and support you, that is a lie. Because in doing that, because the National Media Commission is set up with national resources, and the nation is responsible for the right of every Ghanaian. And so we cannot sit down and allow one group of Ghanaians to be undermining the rights of another Ghanaian. We need to look into that. You see, George made some allusions into things. Now, we think that the National Media Commission is a very civil way of intervening in matters of free speech and the irresponsible conduct. And so, therefore, the expectation is that if the National Media Commission says that, please put a brake on what you are doing, people will respect that. Because it is better than the policeman arresting you. You know, the other day, the speaker was talking, and he was trying to make a distinction between arrest and invitation. Now, when the police invite people, do they announce it to everybody? Do we know whether those people were initially politely invited and they didn't go? And is invitation a term of art? What is invitation? Is it sending them a letter that please come, or going there and telling them, or holding the person, but in a decent way? You see, I mean, the biggest problem that we face overall is the attitude of our security people in dealing with people who have committed offense. It is not just about the journalists. But when we single out the journalists as if they are mistreated than other Ghanaians, then we are not solving the problem. If we want our police to be civil towards every other Ghanaian, we must fight for that. Because we have seen instances where they have arrested people in churches. What do we say about that? And those people were not journalists, you know. So, for me personally, I think that the best approach for us is to make sure that we do our work the way that we are supposed to do it. I mean, I worked as a journalist, starting as a reporter throughout. I have taken on serious topics. I have dealt with serious matter. For instance, when the president went to the trade fair and said that peanut soap should not be bought, I said, President, don't talk like that. Nobody arrested me because I never said you're a foolish president, that's why you are doing that. All that I said is that President, don't talk like this. Because no foreign investor will come to Ghana without talking to a local investor. So if you are the president and I said this and you arrest me, it is your problem. Yeah, but if I said that, look at this foolish president. He doesn't understand anything. He's totally useless. That's why he's doing that. You know, I'm creating a problem for everybody, including myself.
Yes, right.
We must know how to use language, and language must be civil. There's a way. That's why our elders tell us. He says that when somebody says that, come and take food into your big mouth, say it is not an insult, but it is an insult. And they explain it. Because the size of your mouth is not a measure of your hunger. And so if somebody says that, come and take food into your big mouth and you have dignity, you don't take the food. You know, and that's the way that they do about it.
That is if you are not hungry.
Yes, even if you are hungry, because the human being is the only one who will even want to die to so that they assert their integrity.
That's true.
He said only the human being, that we will fight and fight and fight, including even dying, because our integrity is at stake. And when people say that the pen is mightier than the sword, we must understand it. Because if I lie about you, you know, I mean, the pain that sometimes you may go through, you may die out of that. And we cannot bring you back to life. Right. Now, I mean, as media people, we must understand. And in fact, that is one of the problems that the public have with us. When we as media people, we think that not even the president can stop us from talking. We talk about everybody, but when anybody speaks about that, say, shut up.
Intolerant.
Why should other people shut up? Are we the only people who can talk? And so we must learn how to use our profession to the best in the interest of the people of Ghana. The last time that the GA gave me the platform where they had the seminar, and the media besieged. I said the media are not besieged. If you went in the media in the time that I worked in the media, where I told them, stories were put into the paper. Your name was put as a person who wrote the story. You never knew the source of the story.
Yes.
I mean, we went through all that. So when you live through that, right, and you look at today, where even if a minister wants something, the first thing is that he will plead with you. Is it possible that you can? That alone takes away, I mean, that kind of lesson from the president. So, I mean, you were asking is whether there's a need for us to repeal those laws. You know, there may be some areas that we can modify, but the first step might be taken by the journalists and the media themselves. Because if we do our work professionally, we will render those laws redundant.
Exactly.
And they will never be, because when you say false, and what you are saying is true, would you fall under that law? So why do they write? I mean, a journalist goes there and says that because the name of a ministry is so and so, it is that. Meanwhile, you don't know. And how do you expect me to stand there and defend you when I know that the statement that you are making is out of ignorance? You are getting applause. And that is the other side. And our elders tell us that the lizard says that it is not angry at the one who chooses to kill it, but is angered about the one who stands there to commend that person and say, you are a great max person. Because it is that which encourages them to continue to kill the lizards. I'm a journalist. I feel bad when any journalist is arrested. But we must not forget that we are in times that no journalist can be arrested for 1 hour, 2 hours, and it will not be public knowledge. We lived in this country in 1993 when a journalist was arrested for 3 months just because he had written about the military. And not that what he had written was untrue, they were factual. But for 3 months, nobody knew about it. And when he was shown, his discrepant body was shown on television. That was the first time that everybody was getting, not long after he died. We are no longer living in those times. And so we are in better times than before. What we need to do is to make sure that we are more professional in the things that we do. And that's why I support Prof. When he said Giba, Primpang, and all of them must ensure that they have minimum standards. And because I worked at the National Media Commission before, you know, when I went back to graphic as the editor, we engaged the School of Communication Studies. And today, the graphic has standard for ethical practice in journalism. And so when you, as a graphic reporter, when you go and you misreport, you'll be dealt with at the internal level on the basis of the standards that the company has adopted. You know, and then when you know that, and you are going to write the story, in the first place, you subject yourself to the standards. And there's no way that when you have done what is wrong, management and the board are going to say, oh, hallelujah, you have done what is right. And so that is at the height of ignominy. Right. That management is supporting mediocrity. And that is a motivation for those individuals to continue to misbehave. And we need to look at it from a holistic point of view. And if we, as journalists, want to be relevant to the people of Ghana, then we must take the first steps first and not defend when it is indefensible. Otherwise, we will lose our face, and every one of us will be put together and labeled as bad journalists.
Right. Thank you very much. I'll bring in the GJA president, Mr. Afemoni. From what we've all, what I've been spoken about, and indeed the presentation from Mr. Asa Nkoma, it's clear that the laws necessarily are not targeted at journalists. But over the period, the statement has been journalists are being targeted. Is it still a fair statement to make?
Thank you. And what's happening reignite the debate on the cat and the stinking fish. As we counsel the cat, we should also caution the stinking fish. Contextually, as we blame the cat for its penchant for stealing fish, the time has also come to also sound a note of caution to the media community against the penchant of some of them for recklessness, carelessness, and willfully extending or going beyond the traditional bounds in terms of ethical discipline. We are not lawyers. Some of us are not lawyers. George is, Ayabafu is. But I don't think we need any superfluity of legal knowledge to draw a conclusion that some of our laws are rooted in antiquity. And so they need to be reformed. And as is admitted, they were crafted not to regulate the media, but to hold certain recalcitrant, certain careless citizens to account. We ought to understand that the ethical standards we all desire, let me admit that in many instances, the ethics of the profession, as Prof also amplified and George, the ethics of the profession are observed more in breach than in observance. And this is a very serious matter. And who bound up if you attempt to draw the attention of some of the perpetrators of ethical misconduct? They take it to the cleaners. But some of us are used to being taken to the cleaners. But the time has come to do a very serious introspection and see where, as journalists, we are falling for. And one clear area is ethics. And we also need to emphasize that ethical standards, the desired ethical standards, are not the product of happenstance. They are the fruits of investing in training and retraining. Take the GJ Code of Ethics, for example. I can say, without any fear of contradiction, that majority of journalists have not even cited a copy, let alone internalize its content and practice it. This is a very serious matter. There was a program, Kumasi, the Media Enhancement Capacity Program. And the participants were asked whether they've had any training in journalism. More than half of them said no. Again, this again reinforces the statements by Joseph Pulitzer. Joseph Pulitzer was a famous American editor and publisher. And he said, journalists are educated and not born. When he made that statement about 200, 300 years ago, he was petted with all kinds of verbal stones for stirring a huge controversy. Because in those days, it was fashionable to train journalists by osmosis or on the job and not in a well-structured environment as we see at Legon, at Tech, Winneba University, Ekojuenkan School, and many others. So we are very concerned about the animalistic disregard for the right of journalists in terms of their mode of arrest. And we raised this issue when we met the IGP about 2 weeks ago. And we agreed that the police will now be more civil in the arrest of journalists. They will extend invitations to them through the umbrella organization. I believe this is a huge step forward in addressing the challenges and unfortunate incidents we are witnessing. So, as I said, we are overly concerned about what is happening, but we believe that it is a bend and not the end to media freedom. And Wafaya cited examples in the past when we're shackled by all kinds of laws, when we're hobbled by all kinds of incidents and constraints. But now, relatively, we are free. But we also need to amplify the point that freedom, anyway, has no absolute value. Freedom has its limits. And some of the limits can be unpalatable, as we are witnessing now. So it's a wake-up call to the media community to shape up in response to the ethics, in response to expectations of the public. Research has shown that public trust in the media is on the wane, not because perpetration of mediocrity and carelessness is on the rise. So this is a wake-up call I need to emphasize. But at the same time, we will expect the law and order community to be humane and civilized in applying the law. The Bible, which is a perennial spring of wisdom and an infallible guide of conduct, teaches us in 1 Corinthians 10:23 that all things are lawful, but not all things are desirable. Yes, the law might be on your side in arresting journalists, but also look at the implications of arresting journalists in a manner which will provoke or ignite concern nationally and internationally. I rest my case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bonner. I want us to acknowledge the presence of two gentlemen, the MP for Tamale North, Alhassan Suhini, who himself was a former journalist, and as well as Mr. Carl Kufuor. I'm opening the floor now for comments as well as questions. I'll start with Carl Kufuor. I know you have a comment to make on our discussion so far.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Is it afternoon? I think it's probably good afternoon now.
Any of them?
It's very interesting to see my colleagues, not in the law profession, but in the media, Ace and George speaking and bemoaning a few things, and my prof himself, who lectured me. However, when I look at the quality of journalism at display now, and in light of the main theme of exploring the boundaries of freedom of speech, I think maybe the GJA, the National Media Commission, should approach government to take a look at those who will be allowed to practice journalism. What am I driving at? Nobody, absolutely nobody, who has been to the law school, who has not been to law school, can practice law. Ace, can you correct me?
It's actually a crime.
There you are. So I think that if anybody wants to practice journalism, maybe those two institutions need to get some form of certification. Yes, you can come out with your BA, your MSc, your MA. But when you're going to practice that thing, then you need to go through it. Because your contemporaries, and George is well aware, because George is in both camps, he's actually in 3 camps. He's in IPR Ghana with me. And proposals have been brought to government to make sure that for people to practice PR, like the lawyers, let's say you do an LLB first, then you can become a solicitor. Am I right?
Yes,
good.
Yeah.
So you do behind the scenes. But if you want to go and do the law, if you want to practice PR in this country, then you must get the certification from IPR Ghana. Maybe that's what journalism needs. Because all of us listen to various media houses. And where people are treading, it's really, there's a very thin line between being defamed and fair comment. Maybe those people, and it turns out invariably that the majority of those people are those who have not even been to some form of journalism school. The second thing has to do with the issue of freedom of speech. So if I write an article, and I'm using George's example, and I use certain words, like the word George used, coup. If I put the word coup in inverted commas, can that mean I can get away with it? Because somebody is saying creating panic. Where are the armed forces? Maybe I'm going to encourage a coup, and I put the coup. Because if I leave it like that, it means that, hey, Charlie, I'm in trouble. So if I put the coup in inverted commas, is that fair comment? I await the response.
Okay. So 2 responses, one from NMC, one from the GJ president, over ensuring that people don't just practice journalism from nowhere. They go through the process of other professions, medicine, law, etc., and then, into brackets, using the coup.
But the danger with that is that the Constitution says you cannot license media. Mm-hmm. So if you have a constitutional hurdle, that is why the person does not require that to be in the media space. So you can do that for journalists, okay, but you don't need to be a journalist to be in the media space. Yeah. And so and that was really an attempt. Like I said, a lot of these rights were a reaction to what happened in the early 60s. Mm-hmm. So to overcome that, and if you look at our history, it's as if our history started with that. My favorite topic, Auditor General. Even the independence of the Auditor General was stated as a deliberate response to things that happened between 1960 and 1966. That is why it was set up as an independent organization. In fact, it is not subject to anybody at all in this country. But Ghanaians like, how is that possible? Well, that's in your constitution. Check it. But so it's very difficult to do this, Carl. It's an ideal thing. Mm-hmm. So you might certify journalists, but by the constitution, you cannot register media. That is a problem we have. We wanted the media freedom. Yeah. And now we are seeing the issue. Maybe the in the industry can put their heads together to see whether we amend that or how we regulate it in the light of the principle. The Constitution really wanted a liberal media space. Yes. Also in reaction to what we had been through between 1983 and 1993, sort of.
Right. In addition to that, okay, I'm sure they'll come back to it, and Prof may help to speak to this. Even beyond Ghana, in addition to the constitutional issue that is raised, it took like more than 2 decades of debate at the level of UNESCO these issues are, there's a lot of intellectual debate on it that, I mean, if Prof has time, may speak to it. So it's a very complicated issue that one wants to be very cautious about.
Okay. Prof, you want to speak?
Yeah,
When Prof finishes, I'll address that.
I don't think that licensing people who go into the media is what will cure the problem. You see, because what we are talking about, the kinds of speech on political platforms, in media, and so on that we are all concerned about are not usually spoken by people who have no school education. People with PhDs are also complicit in this by speaking in certain ways on all kinds of media platforms. So what we may, and again, I keep insisting on the responsibilities of the owners of the media organization. If you employ somebody to come and work for you, and that is why I was trying to make a distinction between professional media houses and propagandistic media houses. If political parties have media, and they will be honest and tell us that it is for party A and for party B. If churches will set up media and say it is for church A or church B, mosque A or mosque B, we know they are not professional. They are for propaganda. They are trying to win people to their sites by all means necessary. So we judge them differently. That will not, of course, protect them from the law when they do certain things. But if a city FM is set up and we all know that they claim to be professional, then the owners, when they employ them, should train them in-house, first of all, according to a set rule of conduct. I think that that's where, and if people want to go to GIJ, wherever, and so on, they can go there. But even when they come into the newsroom, the owners must insist that they are versed in that City FM's rules of conduct. So that, like what Ms. Hayebwa said about graphic, they have an editorial policy guide. In this country, and I've run around this country to most of the radio stations operating in districts and so on, most media houses don't have a clue what an editorial policy is. So they don't have an editorial policy guide so that young people come in from, and many of these stations in the districts, they are run by senior high school graduates. People who have not had much academic training. So they do as they please. We have situations where owners give bonuses to people who are insulting public officers, who are misbehaving on radio. So if the owners don't check themselves, we're going to have these problems. But again, let me pose one question also for our politicians. Why is it that government after government, they refuse to pass this broadcasting law? Now the draft is obsolete. So many things have happened in technology and so on and so forth. So there'll be a need for quite some revision. That will not cure everything, but still, how can any democracy run for 25, 30 years without an act, without legislation regulating that important media industry? That's a very strange situation. But I suppose it will not pass because most of these stations, or many of them, are owned by politicians. Take a small town like Tumu. A certain MP has a radio station, and a former MP has a radio station, and there is this more refined community radio. 3 radio stations in Tumu.
I'll invite the president of
I wanted to
Kiba.
deal with this issue of
The coup part. Okay.
Carl, I just searched through Ghana law. The word coup is not used in Ghana law. Maybe because it's not an English word originally. Yeah, good. And so it's being put in inverted commas or not could have various meanings. what I'll plead is that sometimes in our anger, Ghana can frustrate you. I mean, anybody who doesn't know that doesn't live in this country. Ghana can frustrate you. So sometimes in our frustration and our anger, just hit the brakes first. I've learned that very painfully. In your anger, don't slam the accelerator. Hit the brakes first. Check yourself first. That pause would help you choose better words to still convey your anger. It doesn't mean you're weak. Because you see, although the law doesn't mention the word coup, it mentions the word treason. Now, when you hear the word treason, you think, how? I think I can say with the way you're treason. Hold on a sec. Note that inciting somebody to do treason is treason. We just talked about words. Mm-hmm. I am certain that no sane person is asking for it. It's frustration. That when the system doesn't work, you're like, hold on before you say that. Because not just, so it's caution, it's words. Ladies and gentlemen, can we sometimes take in a deep breath? That's all. And often the link, what stops you from being prosecuted is taking a deep breath. People say, why are you not talking about this? Why are you not talking about this? Why are you talking about that? And I say, you know what? The unfortunate thing for me is that I happen to know this thing called law. And so I always say, hey, hold on, guys. When the young people are like, let's do this, I'm like, hold on. No, you can't say it that way. You got to say it this way. No, you can't do this. You got to say, oh, you're a coward. You're a hypocrite. I'm like, don't worry, it will be my head going in jail. And you know, Ghana, they'll praise you. But as my mother would say, yeah, come fool me a fraud, yeah, come fool a chacha. When the trouble comes, that is where you see. Ghana. So we have to be very careful about the words we use in our frustration. I don't think that anybody wants to do that. It's frustration. And I think that the system ought to understand. You understand? But if we're to look at it, a policeman will say, Mr. Nkuma, what are you talking about? The thing says, and I said, what does it mean to incite? To ask somebody to do the thing that you did yourself. But really, I mean, are we really going to go to court with this? You understand what I'm saying? So I plead, take a deep breath in exercising journalists, in exercising just before you hit send, pause and read over. Maybe it's just a typo you need to fix.
Thank you for that good advice. I'll invite Mr. Sonkwa Mills for his comment, the president of GIBA.
This is my classmate.
Thank you. I think quite a number of topics here. GIBA is an association of private broadcasters, mainly radio and TV. And our mission is to bring development, and also we advocate to ensure that there's adequate policies and for the operation of stations who are our members, which is a caveat that I'll bring. We do not cover the total membership of stations across the country yet, though that is a vision. And one of the things that we should take notice of is that in the last 10 years, the terrain of broadcasting has completely changed. It's changed in numbers. Today, as I speak, we have 684 authorizations for radio. We have 141 TV stations. And if you look back 10, 15 years, we were nowhere near this. Now, when you have that number, the horses have already left the stable, and regulation is all the way back. That is one part. And then we also have internet. Today we have TV stations that are online, radio online. So that's even not including the numbers that I have mentioned. So we are at a junction where I think these discussions have come to form. And so it's not just by chance that things have happened and now it's biting and it's a new situation. The environment is different. For us, we actually have been going around the country. I'm just coming from Kumasi. And I've done a couple of interviews. And I think the last one is exactly my topic was that we must define the boundaries of free speech. Now, for us, for members, we have a code of conduct. Of course, numbers have increased, and I don't think we've done enough dissemination. So it is one of the things that we're doing in terms of our code of conduct. And I think a very perfect presentation from Ace, because I tend to pick a lot of links of what he said sits in the code of ethics for us. And our members have, almost all of them have been very well behaved for a long time. So it gives us some comfort. But we're bringing on new members. And as we go around to recruit members, the situation, I think some have been mentioned here, is in some of the stations, the normal structure that you probably will have in city, where you have got an editor and there's a general manager and all that.
That's not there.
Your station's manned by 2, 3, 4 people. Yes, they're doing work. It's good work within the community. They actually are giving access to information and a voice to the people from very far. So what do? We look at the example that Carl raised of should we allow journalists, etc. Where we are now, it's already gone. There's so many people in broadcasting who have never studied journalism. So what have we done? We've been in conversations, and one initiative has actually started where we're doing training of journalists. It was launched in January. But I remember that before this started, a lot of conversations have gone on because of the situation we are in. Ladies and gentlemen, that is where we are today. And so where do we move from here? For those who don't have the training, it's important that we try and institutionalize and then train. And the training is not just on management of stations, but like the stuff that ACE brought, which sits in a code of conduct, the laws that are involved, the do's and don'ts that impact the work of journalists. Knowledge, I think, is so valuable, and if that is what people have, it could actually change a lot in the landscape. So you find in some of the cases that we've had, and also in conversations with the police, the knowledge was both. I was with AFEL when we in a number of meetings with the police. And we also looked at mode of arrest. They're doing a good job. He said it's new leadership. So now they're picking certain laws that have been on the shelf, they dusted them, and they're applying them. The laws are there. So they just need to be applied. You've seen the same in Greater Accra, what is happening in terms of Operation Clean Your Frontage, etc. So the laws have been there. We need to test them, not rush to repeal. That is our view. If we test them, then we can have a better discussion on the impact. But so far, for example, with the arrests, one person said, why don't we comment very quickly? But you find that there are always two sides of the coin. What actually comes out, but then when you actually get the details, it differs. So we do not rush till we have details. So there's a lot of, we need to find partnerships to disseminate. I think there's a lot of information that has to go through. We've got so many stations that need education. Not all of them are within our fold, but that has to be done, and I think we need to create those partnerships with people with the insights, like what ACE has done, and then have sessions where we can do both, and including the police, so we can have back and forth. So we create more solid partnerships and achieve an environment which I think would make things much better. For us, I think that is what has been our mission so far.
Vivian, can I ask a question that I'm sure my journalist friends will be very unhappy to hear? And you know, Cecil has been my classmate since 1979, right, when we went to Form 1 on the same day. And he's been worrying me since then. It says almost every week you come with a media question. Next time I'll charge you fees.
I do.
Now, but
even the mode of when you're invited.
Yes, we're talking about invitation.
Yes, I asked him the question.
Yes, he followed me up with all of that.
When you're invited, it's because of conversations we have and what we hear. When you're invited by the police and you do not go,
they'll convert it into an arrest with cuff.
What happens? So I asked,
so the
because I
is a
need to
polite
advise
way.
people, and he gives me an answer, because when you're invited and you do not go, It is presumed that you are
Arrested.
avoiding, you're resisting
Yeah.
arrest. Now, the style of arrest, you actually becomes a gray area. How you be arrested, and that becomes a problem.
That's a reasonable constraint. But I was going to ask a question that you media owners. Now, so somebody defames you. We've repealed criminal law. Where's Carl? He said, we repealed criminal libel. So you have civil libel. You pay a lawyer fees. You are in court for a year and a half, 2 years. You win a judgment, damages. To find that the person who damaged your reputation took you through the gutter. It's impecunious. He's a man of straw. He doesn't have two pesos to rub together. What purports to be a newspaper is a rag sheet. It's never printed. It's only on social media. So you have nothing to ventilate your... Because when the court says you are right, the court gives you money. What then do you do? Then you might find out that although the newspaper itself has no, or newspaper or media house has no access to proceed against, the building it is in is rented. The owner lives in a beautiful mansion at Trazako, and the shareholders have assets. So I've often wondered, should we pass a law that specifically lifts the veil of incorporation when it comes to defamation? So that when a person is defamed, you sue not just the one who wrote the story, but the directors of the company and the shareholders who benefit from the funds. No, because shareholders are supposed to collect dividend. It has occurred to me, I have never really fully ventilated it. I know Seth is going to fight with me on that.
He's pointing to me because the best practice is that in media regulations, that is precisely what you do.
Oh.
First of all, legislation that targets individual journalists creates a chilling effect and is bad. So what you do is to set legislation that actually targets the company.
But the company might be nothing, might be fly by night. The people with the money.
That's the next level. That's the next.
The owners, the politicians.
Do you recall in the US, excuse me on TV, but it's generally called the Ripple case. The Super Bowl scenario where the dress malfunction happened. You recall that the FCC never called Janet Jackson. They never called Justin Timberlake. They just went at the TV station. Do you understand? And the rule is that everything that happens, and Prof has repeatedly said it, everything that happens in the media house is only determinable by the proprietors. If they decide that this person is problematic and therefore won't be on air, that would be the decision. If they decide that certain kinds of characters can't be part of our discussions, that is what it is. So when you speak about the first level is the company. The question about lifting the veil of incorporation, that is for you big lawyers. We will for now say, let us not go there for a start. Let us, particularly for the broadcasting.
But George, the problem is this. We all know that a lot of these FM stations that Cecil is talking about are owned by politicians. You talked about one town, one party has a station, the other party has a station, there's a down the road station. I can imagine what the politician-owned stations are doing. When that station defames me and you say I should stop at the company, the company has nothing except a license that I can't sell. So you win the case and get nothing. So George, I'm just wondering, why doesn't the law allow me to go after the owner, who is the direct beneficiary or indirect beneficiary of what the station is doing, but is separated because the law says that a company is separate and distinct from its shareholders and members. Maybe in defamation, we should reach beyond that.
I'm only telling Cecil and his group.
So that forget the journalists, go after the politician or the money man.
There are big lawyers who even believe that we should go beyond the company. So that is the most important part of this.
I'm not a big lawyer.
Yes. So if they don't understand that where we are, the owners, the companies need to take the bigger responsibility. That day will come when legislation will go beyond the companies to target the directors.
The directors and owners.
And the Supreme Court showed us a small inkling of that in the Muntie 3.
Contempt.
In that contempt case,
Contempt will look over the direct contempt now.
We saw what happened there. We shouldn't think that if we left the problem unattended to, the problem will go away, or we can shout the problem away. Where we are, everybody needs to understand the reality. I've said this repeatedly. Part of the problem I see in Ghana, and it's an exciting problem, is that we tend to scaffold the stage in trying to deal with the problem. If there is poor lighting on stage, instead of switching on the light, everybody will pull their chairs, getting closer to the stage. People begin to build scaffolds. People want to stand over the necks of others in order to see the stage. When all we need to do is just to switch on the light so everybody can relax and enjoy the performance. Where we've gotten to, my honest idea is that all of us need to agree in humility, in modesty, to say we need certain democratic regulatory system that sets minimum standards for how this industry should be run.
Madam, I will add or go beyond what George is suggesting to say that actually reflecting on the conversation going on now, I think you see that we started by talking about limitations on free speech, but we are now in the realm of media policy. And I think that it is time, perhaps, for an institution like Parliament to institute a commission. That is, if in legal terms they have the power to do so. Yeah. Not the executive, but Parliament. And this happens in many countries periodically. We've had this freedom of the media for some time now. Perhaps all of these are telling us that Parliament should constitute a commission, not just of parliamentarians, but of, you know, citizens and so on, to begin to look at all the realms of our media institution in the country. You see, because for instance, we are hearing from the chairman of the National Media Commission, the executive secretary, indications that perhaps even that National Media Commission Act and whatever is in the Constitution need to be looked at again. We are hearing from the industry players, GEBA, questions of improving the standards of their practitioners and all of that. So I think perhaps we've hit a wall. And for society, maybe it is time for Parliament to say, hey, listen, let us look at the environment, the industry, the whole framework of media in this country. And then perhaps we may redefine the situation and move forward.
Okay. Well, our time is almost up. I'll take two comments quickly. One from Mr. Suhini, and then the other from the editor of the Ghanaian Times, and then we'll take our wrap. I know, Cecil, you want to make a comment. Let me take the two, and then quickly we come back to you. So, Alassane.
All right. Thank you very much, Vivian. Let me say good afternoon to you all, and commend our panelists for such brilliant presentations. I have enjoyed every bit of it, and the contributions also. When I got in, I said I wasn't going to say anything, because I have been trying to not to offend people lately. But I have found out that it is so difficult these days to speak, you know, in a crowd, or to speak with people in a group without offending, you know, people, because you ought to be politically correct every now and then, and it's such a difficult task for some of us. Very interesting. But first of all, I agree with almost all the presentations here about responsible, professional, and ethical, you know, behavior when it comes to practicing journalism. Indeed, I have had cause in the course of my practice to even caution colleagues that when I was a news editor, I'll tell my reporters that all you have is just a microphone, it's not a gun. So you don't go out there and think that because you have showed the microphone to people, they have to stand at ease and do as you request. Because some of us carry ourselves as if holding the microphone is like a gun, and so everybody must stand at ease. So I agree that there's a need for us to be very, very responsible and ethical, you know, in what we do. I recently, in fact for 2 weeks now, I've been calling on the floor of Parliament for the Information Minister to be summoned to come with the National Media Commission to discuss with us what what the challenges may be, and perhaps help us to, if there's a need, to look at empowerment of the National Media Commission to play the role that can perhaps give all of us some good sleep at night as far as the work of our media is concerned. For 2 weeks now, I've been making that point. And if I were not here today, because it's on Fridays that we do the business statement, my intention was to raise it again on the floor after the business statement. Yesterday, I made a statement also on the floor about responsible media practice in this country. So we are all concerned. But I have a dilemma, and it is, in my view, sometimes the dilemma that even push some of us to choose a side in our politics. I have said in the speech that, speech that or statement that I delivered yesterday in Parliament, that no country has ever, as far as I have read and listened to people, achieved responsible, free media using coercive state of power. No country in the world has achieved that. And that is why, in my view, I think in the past, we as citizens fought for journalists who did worse than what journalists are doing today. We fought for journalists who did worse. In fact, the criminal libel law, the last people who were prosecuted under the criminal libel law, it's interesting. I was driving here when I heard the discussion and decided to come. I have the publication for which they were prosecuted. They accused the government of the day of dealing in cocaine and arms syndicate. Actually referred to a commissioner, a high commissioner, Yabene, as being a spy who was involved in that syndicate on behalf of the government of Ghana. It did not stop us as citizens to still say that the criminal libel law used against them was bad. We did not urge journalists to be professional, so such a law like the criminal libel law will become redundant. We didn't say, yes, that law is there, but you see, behave and conduct yourself in such a way that the law becomes redundant. As a people, even as we may have admitted that such publications were injurious to our state, especially when there was no evidence provided, we still said it was unfair and unacceptable for the state's power to be used to harass them. If individuals in the publications felt offended, we said, I followed the discussions in those days, that they could resort to the use of civil libel, which is still in our books. So my dilemma is this, that today, when we acknowledge the irresponsibility, the unethical behavior, we are not forceful enough to still tell the state that despite these things, the use of coercive force is not sustainable. The state must know that at the end of it all, states and nations that have used the coercive state of power have led to uprisings. For example, who knows why the gentleman in the Arab Spring poured petrol on himself and burnt himself? Maybe he was fighting a wrong cause. But a thing like that, sometimes when the state doesn't handle it well, nobody questions again if the person is fighting a just cause or not. And it blows in our faces. So I will plead as I conclude, because my intention is not to offend anybody, that we must, continue the struggle that we started years ago, that led to the expansion of the freedoms we enjoy today, so that struggle will expand the freedoms more, even as we ensure and call for ethical and professional conduct, from our media practitioners. I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Alassane Suhuyini. 5 seconds for Mr. Gwyneth, then we'll wrap up. Our time's up.
Thank you very much. And I did not know that I would be speaking after the politician has spoken. And forgive me if I do not match up to him. One thing that I took from the conversation here is about salaries of media practitioners. And going around the country, I am contesting for the president of GJA. One thing I found out was that salaries of journalists are so low in the hinterland that a journalist is paid 100 Ghana cedis at the end of the month. And for me, that is part of the problem we have, particularly when we are talking about the ethics. The temptation is that because the journalist must also care for the family, they may go out there and be unethical in what he or she is doing. And I think this platform provides the opportunity for us to have that conversation and to see how best we can prevail on media owners to be paying journalists adequate salaries. I think the entire conversation has been good, and I wish that we do it often to educate our colleagues and all of us on how to ensure that the recklessness is brought to the direst minimum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, the conversation still continues. Obviously, a lot of questions being asked, still not answered. Cecil, I can't give you the time. We have to wrap up. We have to go off now. So thank you very much. The conversation will continue. I want to say thank you to Mr. Asan Koma. I want to say thank you to Mr. George Sapon, as well as Professor Kakare for joining us today to have this conversation. And thank you to all of you. We have the chairman of NMC here, the president of GJA, president of GIBA, editors, and many other bigwigs as well. Thank you so much. My name is Vivian Kai Loco. Thank you for coming. Goodbye.